Welcome to the Real Vintage Podcast with your host, Stephen Cox. On today's episode,
all we'll talk about is old NASCAR races. Fixins, mashed potatoes, green beans. I would hire anybody if they do that.
all that and more coming up next.
All right, we are excited to be on the Real Vintage Podcast, and I'm Pastor Stephen Cox, and we're so glad to be on our third episode, which is hard to believe, and I'm looking forward to all the feedback and those of you that download and already been subscribing to our channel. We're very thankful for that, and it's been interesting to listen to these podcasts after we've recorded them, and just going back and listening to them. And I know we're only 3 episodes in, but man, I'm excited about it. And all of you that's watching now, those of you that are listening only, we are actually videoing some of it, so you can go and watch it on Facebook and YouTube and different things. And here's what I believe it'll do. I believe it's going to create maybe a little bit more desire, hunger in our listeners to put out some more content each week. I have a special guest today on the podcast, my assistant, Lee Franklin. Lee, introduce yourself.
My name is Lee Franklin, and I've been the assistant pastor here now just a little over a year, June the 1st, 2019. I was originally born I was raised in Union, South Carolina.
Union, South Carolina. If you don't know where that's at, interesting place. Union's a cool place. My first little introduction to Union was at a Waffle House right there in front of Walmart, and I was there visiting. Somebody in the hospital, a little hospital there in Union. It's about 50 minutes from the church, so it's a good little ways. But you don't go to Union on accident. It's more of a place you have to go there for some purpose.
Yes.
Whatever that is, I'm not sure. But Lee actually pastored in Union. For those of you listening, if you're from Union, I'm certainly not dissing on your town. I do live in Woodruff, so you could easily probably diss on my town too. But Union, first time I went there, went to Waffle House, driving down the main road, don't even know what road that is. What's the main road in Union?
Probably Duncan Bypass, 176.
There you go. And about 8 deer in the middle of town run through town. They were confused. I believe they were running from Walmart and running, and it was crazy. But that Waffle House, I've ate there several times. Lee pastored in Union for 6 years. And that's where he and I guess, hooked up.
Yeah.
I preached a revival there for a couple nights. And there at Glory Baptist Church when Lee was pastor there. And then through just God's leading, Lee resigned Glory Baptist Church. And he and his family attended over here for a little while. We were just praying about what the next step was in his life. And we needed an assistant. I needed an assistant. And so Lee came on board a little over a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I didn't know some things about Lee that I know now. I might not have hired him. No, I'm joking. But Lee has had some medical issues here recently, and he's just now getting through some of that. And so we've rejoiced in a lot of the things that God has brought him through in the last 6 months. Very thankful for that. One thing about Lee that we'll bring him on from time to time, that he and I share a love for old NASCAR.
Yes.
Like he and I, we will eat lunch together at times, and all we'll talk about is old NASCAR races. I don't know who does that, but like we'll go back and we'll watch an old 1987 Daytona 500.
Yes.
And we'll sit here and talk about these races that happened 20 and 30 years ago, and like they happened yesterday.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit, Lee, about what got you into NASCAR. What's your first memory of NASCAR?
My first memory of NASCAR, and I probably watched it a little bit before then, but the earliest race I can remember, I was 8 years old, the 1992 Winston. And if you remember the 1992, I believe that was the first one they had under the lights.
Okay.
The first one, Winston under the lights. And the last lap, Kyle Petty spun out Davey Allison. And, we thought it was
the mellow yellow car?
The mellow yellow car spun out the Haviland car, the 28.
Okay, 28.
And he hit the wall. Davey Allison won the race, but as he crossed the finish line, he hit the wall. He had to go to the hospital. It was a bad situation. It was a bad wreck.
On a Winston.
But right before that, Earnhardt was leading toward the end. Of course, I was a big Earnhardt fan. My dad was a big Earnhardt fan.
Hey, man.
And so I was raised up right in that way, so I got addicted to Earnhardt. Now, my grandpa was a big race fan, too.
Okay.
He was a big Harry Gant fan.
Oh, I love Harry Gant.
He hated Earnhardt. He said all Earnhardt does is spin people out. He despised Earnhardt. My uncle was a big Mark Martin fan. So so Sunday afternoons, what we would do, it was the same. We'd go to church, get out of church, and we'd go to Gene's Fine Food and get a bucket of fried chicken.
So is Gene's Fine Food still going?
It's been closed down since the coronavirus, but before then it was still going.
Okay.
But I'd go get a bucket of chicken from Gene's Fine Food. We'd cook the sides, the fixins, however you want to refer to those as. Fixins. Mashed potatoes, macaroni and cheese.
I'm starving right now.
And what we would do, we wouldn't, we talk about you want to eat at the family table. Well, the race was coming on. So what we would do, we'd get the dinner trays. And the dinner trays, we'd have the dinner trays, and we'd sit them in front of the couch, and we'd all watch the race together while we ate fried chicken and ate our fixins.
God,
great memories, man.
That is so Southern.
Every single Sunday.
That is real vintage.
It was awesome. I loved it.
We really hired Lee for that very reason. Because he ate Southern fried chicken on Sunday.
Yes, banana pudding too.
And watched NASCAR. I would hire anybody if they do that. Fixins, mashed potatoes, green beans, and I watched the race. So tell me what, after you eat the chicken, it puts you though in a chicken coma.
Well, normally everybody watched the beginning of the race together. But see, I live right. We'd go to my grandma's and my grandpa's and eat. But then we lived 100 yards away. So then we would go to my house.
Pretty good ways.
Yeah.
Have to walk that chicken off.
Yeah. But we'd walk over there, and we'd finally, the race had started for a good little while, and you sit there, and as the cars went around, after the first or second pit stop, you start getting a little sleepy. And so you took a nap. You took a nap during that time.
And you can do that in a race. For those of you non-NASCAR fans.
It's wonderful.
You might miss an accident. You might but you're not. It's not like an NBA game. It's not like an NFL game. It's different. Those of you need to just check out what I'm talking about. You can sleep in the middle of a NASCAR, wake up with the last 50 laps like you've never missed it.
It's wonderful.
And it is. It's great. So you would wake up, how many laps left?
Usually it'd be 50 to 75. And here's the good thing, and this is one thing about old NASCAR I loved, is the races would start at 12:30. So you were done before evening service.
Oh, yeah.
You got to watch the end of the race. Today they start at like 3 o'clock.
Now, Coca-Cola 600 was a little different.
Coke was different. Yeah, that was a little different.
Different. Yeah. It went late.
It did.
On Sunday night. But it was special.
It was special.
I mean, you could almost miss Sunday evening church. Because then the Indianapolis 500 would go on that day.
Yes.
It literally was the best day. I think Daytona 500, but then the Memorial Day weekend. Would you? Because though I don't follow IndyCar, I kind of like IndyCar.
Yeah,
because they just went together, and some guys would actually race the Indianapolis 500. I think Tony Stewart did it a few times.
Yeah, Kurt Busch did it one time.
Kurt Busch did it one time.
Yes,
where they would fly, get in a helicopter. Somebody else did it. Robbie
did
Gordon.
Montoya do it?
Pablo Montoya.
He may have done it. Yeah.
That's where he came from.
That's where he came from, yeah.
And then maybe, I don't think Robbie Gordon did it.
I can't remember if Robbie Gordon did it or not, but it wouldn't surprise me because he drove a lot of different things. But
he was a driver.
I love it. Even to this point, I got to make a confession about this. I got to make a confession. Whenever I'm late, I will go on my YouTube channel. Well, no, I will go on YouTube, and I will pull up old NASCAR CBS themes from the early 2000s, and and then it makes me drive faster.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'll do it. And then
You got like a little helmet in the back seat.
it's amazing. I start drafting with people on the interstate. It's amazing.
So you will, and you're not just saying this. Like you
no,
really do.
I really do. I really do this. Yeah, it's crazy. It's a sag or MRN radio theme. I love that.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And it just gets my blood pumping. You know, I love it, and I feel like I'm in a race.
So you got both hands on the
both
steering
hands,
wheel?
and I'm drafting. Even though I'm not really drafting, I feel like I am drafting.
Oh
and
my
it's
goodness.
So many memories, man. So many memories as a NASCAR fan.
Then what's the major difference between the old vintage NASCAR? When I say old vintage NASCAR, pre-Earnhardt to post-Earnhardt, because that's kind of my
Oh yeah,
BC AD.
I believe the political correctness is
Okay.
one thing.
Yeah.
People are so robotic by everything they say today. I believe NASCAR's really, I guess you could say, clamped down on what people say. They can't really say what they feel many times. Now, I think a few years ago they finally said let boys be boys, and they started to duke it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I think one thing too is that the personalities have changed a good bit.
They have. They've become a little nicer.
They become nicer. You know, everybody's the same. Everybody's just, you don't see
Some of them look like
distinction.
they've never reached puberty yet.
They don't have any
Well,
facial
some
hair.
of them probably hadn't.
Facial hair. Do you
But
see
there used to
facial
be
hair
some
much?
rough guys.
There was.
Like they'd get out of the car.
Tim Richmond.
Tim Richmond was rough. You know, even like Harry Gant,
Yeah.
Dave Marcus,
The Rooster.
Ricky Rudd. They'd fight you.
They
Kel
would.
Yarbrough,
Yes.
the Allison gang.
David Pearson, man, from
I mean,
Spartanburg.
those guys, yeah. Earnhardt, Petty,
Yeah.
even Kyle, you know, Davey Allison. Davey was one of, of course, I was an Earnhardt fan,
Yeah.
junior fan, but Davey Allison, I loved, he was a great driver.
Yes,
You
he
know,
was.
certainly died too young. But those guys were true racers. You know, I grew up going to Bowman Gray. I went to all these little short tracks, Caraway Speedway, Hickory Motor Speedway. I loved stock modified racing and dirt racing, and I just love racing. So I grew up in the southern. It's like a southern roots, and I think what's happened is NASCAR has kind of gotten ashamed of their roots,
Yes.
like their heritage a little
Yes.
bit, and where they've tried to expand and make it a global. And there's just some sports that needs to stick to their heritage.
Yes.
Like, you know, don't cut out your heritage. Like Darlington, like the Rock, Rockingham,
North Wilkesboro.
North Wilkesboro,
Yeah.
which you and we got to go up
We
there.
got to go.
North Wilkesboro. Different ones where they used to, and they're cutting them back, and they're trying to go to these bigger cities. But here's what I've noticed is look at the stands.
Yeah.
That's the evidence.
Yes.
So now, and I still love NASCAR, but I think you and I are on the same page. NASCAR has a problem, and they're trying to make it more politically correct.
Yes.
But I think people are starving for something that just tells it like it is.
Yes.
Like we still want it and we don't care.
Yes.
If NASCAR is looked at by the world as a bunch of rednecks that like to get in fast cars, so be it.
Yes.
What's
Yeah.
wrong with that?
Nothing wrong with that.
There's
No.
nothing wrong with that.
That's what started
Why
it.
are you ashamed of that?
Yes.
Mike Helton, if you're listening, you need to change.
Yes.
Like, you know, I don't care about certain things that they've like disassociated with.
Yeah.
You know, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you don't want to fly the Confederate flag, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay? But let's not like get away from what we are.
Yeah. Yes.
Like what we are. And I don't mind, you know, I've always loved the conservatism of NASCAR.
Yes.
Like they've always had a president come in. They've always stood up for the national anthem and put their hand over their chest. They always had Joe Nelms. You know, we ought to play that clip on the podcast of him praying, boogity, 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 amen. A pastor in Tennessee. I know Joe. But, you know, what I'm saying is, why can't we continue? You know, I love Darrell Waltrip. I've always liked him. Some
Yeah.
people can't stand him, but I like Darrell Waltrip. I like the way that he is. He's a good announcer. He retired.
He did, yeah.
But
he was good.
He was good in the booth.
He was good.
And
he was real.
He was real.
Yeah.
He didn't hide his emotions. I'll never forget the
Yes.
day that Earnhardt died.
Yes.
Him in the booth, and you could see the worry on his face. But then he's a Christian.
Absolutely.
So he always kept that.
I always remember that National Day of Prayer speech he did.
Man, he did great.
And he pretty much gave the gospel. He preached the gospel right there to everyone.
So that is NASCAR to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I don't like the new cars. There's something about them old Chevy Luminas and Monte Carlos that I loved. Then they're trying to make them more futuristic.
Yeah.
And it takes away the driver's skills sometimes.
It does, yeah.
So I'm still like into NASCAR.
Yeah.
I don't really have a favorite driver. I kind of find myself pulling for Alex Bowman and Dave Blaney, or Ryan Blaney rather. There's some that I just don't like.
Yeah.
There's just some that I don't like. So it's, and we'll save that for another podcast. But do I like the direction that NASCAR is going? I really don't. No. So I don't. That's my thing is my first memories of NASCAR was the Wrangler blue and yellow car.
Yeah.
87.
Yeah.
Back when Earnhardt and some of his glory days, that and he would put you in a wall.
He would.
And I loved it.
Entertaining.
Ironhead, the Intimidator.
Oh, yes.
Then he changed to that black car.
Fit him perfect.
And it was lights out.
Yes.
And but I got to see him race in the Winston 96 in the American flag car.
Yeah.
I got it over there on the wall. Got to see him and I went to Charlotte a few times. So, I love NASCAR. I've always loved it. A lot of my friends never quite understood it. But you just have to. It's a nostalgia type thing.
That's the key. I think I've told you recently. I've been going back to the year 2000, and I've been watching the old races from the year 2000 in order because that was Dale Earnhardt's last full year.
Yeah.
And it's amazing just the memories, and I remember so much of it. I was watching Bristol, the Bristol race the other day, and Earnhardt he had done good so far that year. He was leading the race, and a car spun in front of him, and I still remember that 20 years ago. I said, I think what's going to happen, a car's going to spin in front of him, he's going to wreck. 20 years ago, I still remember that race.
Man, that's pretty. See, we've got a NASCAR historian right here. We do love it, and like we're not embellishing. Like we sat down, we actually talk about NASCAR.
No, we really do.
It's quite comical actually. So we do love it. I was never a big Jeff Gordon fan.
No,
but he came. I respect his driving though. But he came in the mid to late 90s and took over NASCAR, took it away from Earnhardt. Earnhardt probably won 9 championships, wasn't for Gordon. But then Jimmy Johnson era, of course, and here we are today. We really don't have that superstar.
No.
Kyle Busch is a great driver. Kevin Harvick, Logano, and these guys. But
you could probably say the parity is more now than it's ever been in NASCAR.
Yeah.
You really, it's hard to predict exactly who's going to win each race because there's so many good teams. But in some ways,
they need a superstar.
You need a superstar.
Like a superstar.
You need someone that a lot of people love and a lot of people hate. Yeah. That was Earnhardt.
Yeah. And a lot of people hate Kyle Busch.
They do.
And a lot of people hate Joey Logano.
Yes.
And I'm in both of those.
Like, I don't like either one. I really don't like Logano.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
But then they've got these little guys coming in that they're just getting younger and more. I don't know if I'm getting older.
They can't even shave yet.
No, man. And they won't fight. They just want to talk things through.
Yes.
I want to be swinging, man. I want pit crew members flying. I even want their wives fighting. I want to see a big brawl.
That would be entertaining.
Just about every race. And it's just not happening. So that is kind of our old NASCAR versus new NASCAR. We'll talk a little bit more about that in some future podcast. With that being said, Lee and I both share we're kind of old souls. We just are. We love nostalgia. We love traditions, whether it be NASCAR, whether it be Jeeps, whether it be hunting, whether it be anything. But before we get off the podcast, we're both pastors, and we're both here at Bible Baptist Church in Simpsonville. And so we often talk sometimes about just church traditions, why we do what we do, and why we believe, what we believe. And so the other day I was just thinking about some church traditions that they're not really in the Scripture, but why we do some of these things. Obviously, during COVID-19, our church had to stop assembling together. We never stopped as a church, but we just stopped assembling to keep our people safe. We certainly didn't know what was around the corner with this virus. Now we do. We opened up. I think this is our going into our 6th Sunday, I believe it is. And so we're excited about that. Just Sunday morning only, 2 services like we always have, and then Wednesday evenings. But we have yet to open up our Sunday evening service just to, clean our buildings and stuff. We're going to do that here in a few weeks. But that brings me to the first tradition of the church, and that of the Baptist church, I guess you could say, or not just Baptist, but other churches where we have a Sunday evening service. And we have at Bible Baptist Church have a Sunday evening service.
Yes.
We have traditionally, and that's been one of my favorite services because here at our church we have 2 morning services because of the crowds getting in on Sunday morning, which is a good problem. But we have people that would never see each other.
Yeah, that's it, yes.
So Sunday evening is a time where the family gets together, and it's usually a very well-attended service, and it's always fun. It's usually about an hour. We start currently at 6 o'clock, and we end around 10 after 7. I think we're going to do some time changes here in the future with that and bump it up a little bit. But Sunday evening church, it's got a cool feel to it here at our church. We love it. It's fun. We don't try to replicate Sunday morning. That's not the purpose. It's more of a family service. And Lee, tell me your thought on just the tradition of a Sunday evening church service. What do you see the importance of it in this day in which we live?
I think it's like you've already mentioned, especially a church like ours. Sunday morning, you have a lot of visitors. And many times you don't really, I think many times the church members, I know as a pastor myself, many times you're more focused on the new people who are coming in. You want to minister to them. You want to spend time with them. You want to get to know them. And you don't really get to spend as much time with your actual church family. And I know this is a passage we've discussed before. It's Hebrews 10:25. It says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but so much the more exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. And certainly that one another exhorting, you can do some of that on Sunday mornings, but you can do more of that on Sunday evenings because you can, as you said, you can really focus on the church family during that time.
Yeah.
And you don't get to do that as much on Sunday mornings.
No, you don't. I've enjoyed some of the sweetest services we have had in the last, over 4 years has been Sunday evening. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's just the families together.
Yes.
And we just gather around the Word for a few moments. Mm-hmm. I preach to them, and or whoever's preaching, and we have a good time.
Yes.
In the Lord. I've had people ask me before, Pastor, do you always plan on having a Sunday evening service? I do. I love it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's certainly not mandated in Scripture that we ought to have a Sunday evening service, but here's the way I look at it. Every church is unique in its own self.
Yes.
I don't look at a church that does not have a Sunday evening service any differently than I look at one that does.
Yeah.
I don't say, well, they're not biblical or they're liberal or whatever. I don't do that because every church is different. For instance, I have some church friends who rent facilities. Mm-hmm. And they're not able to have a Sunday evening service because they're renting a facility. So what do you say about that? Well, they're not able. Mm-hmm. So, they're not biblical if they don't. No, that's not true.
That's not true.
I think, though, if your church is able and you have the means, the wherewithal, the means to do it, then have a Sunday evening service. I know some churches that have went to Sunday school on Sunday evening. Mm.
Yep.
They actually take it as a discipleship.
Yes.
Man, I love that idea.
Yeah.
I think it's great. And there may be times where we do that. But the meeting together.
Yes.
So I was looking at the online about the history of church services. And, some people think that Sunday evening church is just primarily a Baptist thing or maybe a Baptist Southern thing. That's not true. I was even reading about Spurgeon. Spurgeon actually had a Sunday evening service, and he'd have, of course, a Sunday morning. He would pack it out. Then we'd have like a Monday night prayer meeting, and then it was just prayer. And then Thursday night, he would have another service.
Wow.
And Spurgeon believed that the preached Word of God was preeminent. Mm-hmm. The Puritans, back in the 1600s, 1700s, they were in history records that the Puritans had 2 services a day on Sundays, and then they would have like a Thursday morning something. But they would often meet before the sun would come up to sing praises to God. Before the sun would ever come up, they would meet, and then they would come back on Sunday evening and take the Lord's Supper. And I think what's happened, and Lee, you can chime in, we've kind of gotten away from some things that we should probably go back to.
Absolutely.
We need to focus more on the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
That's what Spurgeon would do. Spurgeon would preach a lot of messages on Sunday evening focusing on the Lord's table.
Yes.
On the blood of Christ and on the body that was bruised and the sacrificial atonement. Mm-hmm. He would do that. It was more of a sombering service, the way I understand it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it keeps people. The Puritans would focus on the 10 Commandments in the evening. So they would talk about things that would keep them more holy. And, the Puritans were holy people, separated. And maybe that's some things that we ought to, as church leaders, really revisit. Go back in history and read what made these churches thrive. What made that time frame thrive with biblical teaching. Sunday evening should be a teaching time, and Wednesday evening should be a praying time.
Yeah.
Because Wednesdays were the focal point of the midweek service was prayer.
And you still see that on church signs today, prayer meeting, and that's because it's traditionally that's how Wednesday night services got started. Yeah.
And nothing wrong with the Bible teaching.
Nothing wrong with it. No.
Obviously, we want to make the Word of God's the focal point, but Wednesday midweek was really a praying time,
Yes.
and Sundays were always teaching and preaching.
Yes.
And I think that is a dynamic trio right there.
Yes.
With Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday night or Thursday or whichever day that you can do. Now, again, is it tradition? Well, it is.
Yeah.
Sunday evening is tradition, but it's a good tradition.
It's a good one. Yes.
It's a good one.
It's a good one.
There's some traditions in the church that are just kind of, you look at them, you're like, why do we do it this way, or why? And we've here at our church we have some traditions we've done away with because it wasn't exactly biblical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it certainly wasn't fitting for our church. I think as church leaders, you sometimes have to examine those things.
I think the key is this. I think you also, and a lot of times this will take a lot of research and obviously studying the Word of God, you got to ask yourself the question, why are we doing this to begin with? Why are we doing this tradition? Is it biblical? Before you go to changing something, I think you got to figure out, okay, is there a reason we're doing it this way? And sometimes there's reasons we're doing things a certain way, but it's not a good reason.
Right.
And I think you have to look at the motivation of why it got started to begin with.
And I'll tell you what I guess is what is not a good reason is to just because one of your favorite preachers don't have it.
Yes, that's.
And
not a
I
good
think
reason.
a lot of times that's what takes place is someone that you idolize or you look up to as a hero does not have something at his church, but you understand he's probably been there way longer than you have, and he's in a different area of the country than you are in, and his dynamic is different.
Yes.
So how in the world can you take what you have and apply it to what someone else has got somewhere else? You can't.
No.
What you'll end up doing is you'll end up hurting yourself. Here at our church, our church has grown, and I thank the Lord for that, but our Sunday evening has grown.
It has.
It's grown, and why would I cut out something that has grown? Why would I cut it out and say, well, we're not going to do it anymore because so-and-so don't do it? No, we want to do it because it's working for our church and it's feeding people. And so that's one area of our tradition at our church that I think that we enjoy.
We do.
I think if I got up and said we're no longer having Sunday evening service, most of the people would say, "Man,
they'd be very
that's a bummer."
They would.
Yeah.
They loved. We love each. That's one good thing about our church is that we love being around each other. We love spending time with each other.
I can't run people off.
You can't. No,
you
can't.
At Sunday evening, sometimes I leave before people.
You do?
Because they're just hanging around.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yeah.
That's a sign of a healthy church.
Yes.
And so I love that. That's one tradition that we'll talk about a little bit more in the future. But Lee, I've enjoyed you being on the podcast today, talking a little bit of old NASCAR.
Yes, sir.
And church tradition. And I hope you guys will like our podcast, download the episodes, keep sharing it, keep talking about it, and like our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. And we'll keep putting out some better, hopefully, as we go along, we'll put out some really good content. I want to give a little shout out to our producer, Ken Everson, putting out another episode, does a great job. And Lee, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
We look forward to many more episodes together. And remember, before we sign off, that fishermen usually fish for fish, but we as disciples of Christ ought to be fishers of men.
Amen.
Keep that in mind. God bless.